Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. You're watching another edition of Break the Fake, where we debunk fake news and combat false narratives. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and let's get rolling. Now, Vladimir Putin recently announced that Russia has always treated defeated enemies with mercy. And in the same breath, he added that during the cleansing of territories from the armed forces of Ukraine, Russian troops, quote, must do everything to ensure the safety of civilians. Words that sound almost tender until you remember what Russian mercy looks like to those who've actually seen it.
Минимизации напрасных жертв, прошу, как мы и делали с вами ранее, принять все исчерпывающие меры для обеспечения сдачи в плен украинских военнослужащих, тех, которые, конечно, пожелают это сделать. Мы знаем с вами, вы знаете лучше, чем кто-либо другой, это для военнослужащих армии Украины не так просто, потому что им в спину стреляют и сверху дронами обрабатывают, уничтожают тех, кто пытается сдаться в плен. Тем не менее, с нашей стороны это естественно, и нужно действовать и с пленными, обращаться в соответствии с нормами международного права и законодательства Российской Федерации. А армия России исторически всегда относилась к поверженному противнику с милосердием. И будем из этого исходить. Мы с вами неоднократно уже это обсуждали, вы мне докладывали о разных ситуациях, которые складывались на тех или других участках боевого соприкосновения. Вот в таком же режиме прошу действовать дальше. Ну и, конечно, в ходе боевой работы по зачистке этих территорий нужно сделать все для того, чтобы обеспечить безопасность гражданского населения, которым украинские формирования прикрываются как живым щитом. Местным жителям должна быть оказана вся необходимая помощь и приняты меры по их эвакуации в безопасные районы.
So here are the facts. Ukrainian soldier Dmitry Polovyan, who survived captivity, recalled how Russian guards forced prisoners with broken legs to crawl to interrogations. Others were beaten or stabbed with owls. Another prisoner of war, Andriy Tarasyuk, said that they were tortured with electric shocks for days. Electrotherapy, as their captors called it. Torture not for information, but for pleasure. Danilo Murashkin described food laced with stones, glass shards, and rat droppings. This is what the Kremlin calls mercy, the kind that smells of burnt skin and concrete walls, the kind that speaks softly about compassion while tightening the ropes in the basement. And when Putin talks about protecting civilians, it's impossible not to think of Mariupol, a city erased for its own safety. Months without food, water, or power as Russian planes liberated people from their homes, or Bucha, Irpin, where civilians were protected with bullets to the back of their head, tied hands, burnt bodies in the street. That is where the real version of Russian humanism was born, armed, masked, and smiling for the camera. Today, propaganda still paints Russia as a merciful army of liberators, but every witness, every survivor, every ruined street tells the same story. When Putin speaks of mercy, the translation is simple: torture, murder, destruction, delivered politely. Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov has made headlines yet again with a sensational statement. He announced that Russia is ready to provide security guarantees that it will not attack NATO and EU countries. You can almost hear the reaction in Brussels. So they promised not to attack at least until lunch? It's another episode of Russia Guarantees Peace, a show that's been running for years without a single logical scene.
Мы видим, что страны НАТО, Евросоюза в подавляющем большинстве своем отказываются признать объективный факт завершения доминирования Запада и наступления новой исторической эпохи. И в этом их принципиальное отличие от России, наших партнеров по СНГ, Китая, Индии, Ирана, КНДР и всех тех государств Евразии, которые убеждены, что залогом стабильности и благополучия нашего континента является неукоснительное соблюдение принципа суверенного равенства и неделимости безопасности всех, а не только отдельных избранных, считающих себя выше закона и вне морали. Не вина России и наших союзников, что за последние годы были подорваны, а затем и похоронены международные договоренности в сфере контроля над вооружениями. Расширение НАТО не прекращается ни на минуту, вопреки данным еще советским руководителям заверениям не продвигаться ни на дюйм на восток. Причем это делается вопреки взятым в рамках Организации по безопасности и сотрудничеству в Европе на высшем уровне обязательством не укреплять собственную безопасность за чужой счет и не стремиться к региональному, да и, естественно, глобальному доминированию.
Yeah, we've seen this movie before. In early 2022, Moscow insisted it had no intention of attacking Ukraine. Days later, Russian tanks crossed the border. And before that, the Minsk Agreement of 2014 to 2015, which Russia signed as a guarantor of peace, those were supposed to end the fighting in Donbass and open a path to diplomacy. Instead, Russia kept arming militants, supplying weapons, and sabotaging the very process it claims to protect. That is how Moscow's peace guarantees usually end, with artillery. So when Lavrov says we won't attack, the world hears what experience has already translated. We're just preparing. Against the backdrop of the 2022 full-scale invasion and Minsk Agreement, Russia's so-called security guarantees sound less like diplomacy and more like an echo. Moscow has guaranteed peace before, and every time it started a war. Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and US Marine Corps intelligence officer, recently made waves with a new claim about the war in Ukraine. He said, and I quote, "There's a lot of Ukrainians dying. 36 to 1, Ukrainians popping off 2,000 to 3,000 dead people. The Russian ain't suffering that." In his view, Russia loses about 100 soldiers a day while Ukraine loses thousands. Sounds bad, doesn't it? Until you start doing some grade school arithmetic.
But my question to you is the advancements on the ground. I looked it up yesterday. I'm like, what percentage increase? I'm not sure if you've looked it up. I looked it up briefly last night after I was, I think I was with Colonel McGregor yesterday, and I looked up that figure. They've only advanced the amount of additional territory they gained this year, so far this year, and I asked people to check it, just to check it on ChatGPT or Google, is about 2.5%, single-digit numbers, percentages. So about 2.5 or 3.5% increase in the territory they've gained at a pretty heavy cost. I know Ukraine is...
But wait. What cost has Russia paid? You keep saying, everyone keeps saying a pretty heavy cost. Give me a number, a definitive number that you know is true. Don't repeat to me the crap you get from the media.
I don't know the definite. I don't know the actual number, but there's a lot of people dying on both sides. I don't know the actual.
There's a lot of Ukrainians dying. 36 to 1 kill ratio. I'm giving it to you right now, Mario. You can go to the bank with that. 36 to 1. Every day, Ukrainians popping off 2,000 to 3,000 dead people. Okay, the Russians ain't suffering that. The Russians are suffering 100, 150 dead a day on their worst day.
Now let's look at the numbers, shall we? Independent estimates suggest around 1 million Russians have been killed since the start of the full-scale invasion. If Ritter's 36 to 1 ratio were true, that would mean 36 million Ukrainian deaths in a country of 37.8 million people. So unless Ukraine has achieved necromancy, his math ain't mathin'. Even his military logic collapsed on contact with reality. There has never been a 36 to 1 kill ratio in any modern conflict, and certainly not in one where the attacker can't take ground. Ukraine started this war controlling 25 of its 27 regional capitals. 3 years later, it still controlled 25. Russia still holds the same 2 in Donbass. So are the defenders superhuman, or are Ritter's numbers super fictional? Now, Ritter isn't new to this game, by the way. He's long been a fan of Russian propaganda outlets, holding them as the beacon of journalistic integrity, calling RT rigorous in fact-checking and claiming it tells more truth than US media. Yep, that same RT, the one that's been our most reliable source of unintentional comedy. Yet, he reposts Kremlin talking points almost daily between his court appearances. Integrity? Let's just say don't Google what Scott Ritter was twice convicted for. By the way, how did this guy ever get to inspect anything for the UN? Every critical military analyst agreed, attacking forces almost always take heavier losses than those defending. That's basic war math, except in propaganda where equations obey politics, not logic. Ritter calls his claims analysis, the Kremlin calls it evidence, and the rest of us can call them what they really are: bull-faced lies. And with that, we conclude this edition of Break the Fake. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.